Attacking the markets with wishful thinking or stone coldness can both lead to negative impacts. Here's how idealism and realism affect our trading and what to do about it. Trading is more than crisscrossing lines and using abbreviations that make us sound smart. Surely those are important too, but if we lack the deeper game, the psychological one, winning will automatically be a Sisyphean task. Fundamentally, there are two types of trading mindsets, both of which are harmful in their own respective ways. We're talking about the idealistic versus the realistic trader. But before we get started, if you appreciate what I do, please like and subscribe below. It will make you look cool and people will respect you.
Peace.
Alright, here we go. Let's begin with the most colorful one, the idealist. Also a synonym to a dreamer, romantic and wishful thinker.
You're in love with a fantasy.
Now, the idealist really wins. Deep at heart, they trade for reasons beyond profits, often ones unclear even to themselves. Just like the idealist poker player dreams of pocket aces and royal flushes and is willing to pay through the nose in the wait for such rare rewards, the idealistic trader is naturally attracted to exciting extremities. They dream of buying the very bottom and selling the very top. For to an idealist, gray areas and boredom are painful.
Every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way.
Instead, they search for events that can validate their perception of reality, a utopic such in which ideas, dreams and personal values overrule facts, data and numbers. They typically believe that the reality is dependent on the mind rather than independent of the mind, and the very thought of partaking in gratifying extremities fulfills their spiritual and subconscious aspirations for which they deeply crave. For this reason, when an idealist gets into trading, they approach it on their own conditions, perfectly tailored to fit their own psychological needs as well as psychological vulnerabilities.
And as soon as they saw me, they came bounding over.
In their world, they see no contradiction whatsoever of the effect their personal opinions have on actual reality. For as long as they're just determined enough, reality must somehow bend to cater to their conclusions and delusions.
I am a singer, I'm a dancer, and I am a superstar. You can ask my family, you can ask my friend, you can ask one of my therapists. Gloria, you're always on the run now.
Simply put, the idealist takes their psychological needs and shortcomings with them to whatever field they enter. This is why hardcore idealists are typically well off from some type of forced upon structure such as military service or a professional field in which they are obliged to adhere to protocol, for it gives them a feeling of control over their often untamed parts of themselves. Of course, some levels of idealism is healthy, but once it engulfs too much of our reasoning, it quickly gets toxic and we begin to drift. That's when opinions and feelings overrule objective reality. It's postmodernism defined and a delusioned and dangerous approach to anything that requires empirically fact-based decisions. These are the people who use the dangerous term my truth. You say 2 + 2 = 4? Well, in my opinion, 2 + 2 = 5, and that's my truth.
They don't believe that there's any such thing as competence. They don't believe that there's any such thing as up. This is all, postmodernism wipes all of that out.
One can easily conclude that the world has probably never been as idealized and distanced from reality as it is today. We see that particularly within contemporary politics, where square pegs are forced into round holes simply because the square peg is what the majority of delusioned politicians, influencers and professional bullshitters want the reality to be like. But the reality cares as little about our opinions as math cares about someone who claims that 2 + 2 = 5. If enough people progress our societies with the conviction that 2 + 2 does equal 5, there will be consequences.
2 makes 4.
Sometimes, Winston. Sometimes they're 5. Sometimes they're three.
The same applies to idealized and reality-denying traders. But try bringing your truths to the market and see what happens. You'll lose money. Guaranteed. Simply put, unless we make the conscious effort of approaching trading from a realistic viewpoint, we often cannot see the trading forest for all our psychological trees. Moving on to the realist. Amongst the winners we find the realists. But don't be fooled by the classical rhetorical fallacy, for just because winners are realists doesn't mean all realists are winners. It's just a prerequisite for becoming one. For just because someone is a realist doesn't mean they can't be of poor judgment or outright stupid. Now, sticking to a realistic or proven agenda, especially before it has become part of our programming, is difficult, for it often causes us to make counterintuitive and emotionally unpleasant decisions. For most high-level stuff makes little sense to us at first glance. Most people think they belong to the seemingly virtuous realist camp, when in fact they don't. For few people do.
I mean, I'm a realist, I understand.
It typically requires great conscious effort to arrive at that. Rather, most of us are such experts at fooling ourselves. Now, the problem with realistic approaches is that they tend to lack the spark, that inexplainable supernatural element that can most closely be likened as the soul. I can speak from personal experience on this matter, as my long deep love for online poker died once it turned into a soulless game sometime in the summer of 2009. Before that, in the good old days, playing online poker was the online equivalent to the Wild Wild West. People gave action as if the Armageddon were upon us tomorrow. It was the era when poker was fun, crazy, and played with a lot of heart. Today it's become overly theorized, and unless you have mastered an array of technical and statistical tools, the door to profits is securely shut and locked.
It's something like that. Is his flatting range.
Online poker has gone from the idealistic Wild Wild West to a much too realistic conveyor belt. To summarize the idealist and the realist, being an idealist means to see things the way we want to see them, pink glasses style. We overrule reality to fit our psychological biases and shortcomings. Being a realist, on the other hand, means to see things exactly for what they are, however unsexy, boring, or unsatisfying. Now, this is where things get truly interesting, for typically we're stuck with either of two scenarios. Either we get the psychological satisfaction but not the actual results, or we get the financial results but at the expense of feeling emotionally unsatisfied. Trading with an idealistic mindset more resembles a kind of adult play, a way to keep the child within us and its dreams alive. It's the part that protects us from becoming too adult, from turning into cold robots, and from being despiritualized. By taking something from the idealistic camp and moving it entirely into the realist camp, on the other hand, most of the spirit is typically lost. For becoming too rational could easily end up being at the expense of our inner drive. Most of us will have a much difficult time in succeeding at anything of which our heart does not approve. For we may fool our intellect for some time, but we will never fool our heart and soul. That's why when we do things which are not meant for us, we typically have a falling out whenever we face our first real adversities.
You tried your best and you failed miserably. The lesson is never try.
This is why passion is key, for unless we're genuinely into trading, we don't stand a snowball's chance in hell to win. It appears there will always be a grievous trade-off, whether we trade with an idealistic bias or with a realistic lackluster. At first glance, it may come across as a catch-22, but rest assured, there is a solution. Now, one would think the question at hand is a binary one, that it all boils down to being either an idealist or a realist, and simply accepting the downsides that each respective side comes with. But here's the good news, for in fact there are not two options, but rather three. Either we remain content idealistic traders and accept that we trade for psychological reasons rather than for profits. And if profits happen, is merely a happy coincidence. Don't get me wrong, for there is nothing wrong per se about being an idealistic trader. It's your money and you do whatever you please with it. But don't make yourself any illusions, for it will be an expensive experience. If you choose this camp, you will be well advised to trade with smaller amounts for fun and to treat trading as a hobby. The second option is the realistic path of simply trading right, which quite often is a dull dream killer that will eventually bore us or frustrate us into making mistakes. For unless our true incentives really is money and nothing else but money, we're bound to lose anyway, as our true psychological drivers are likely to overrule our intellect.
Look what they did to my head.
All right, I'm gonna give you a choice. You can either have the money and the hammer, or you can walk out of here. You can't have both.
For whenever we go against our nature, nature wins. No exceptions. Or we choose the third way, the golden way of combining the two. Looking back at my own journey, it's beyond doubt that I too did have an idealistic approach to trading for much too long and without my knowing. One that was in stark contrast to reality. And when we as traders insist on 2 + 2 = 5, our money tends to disagree with us to the same degree as sensible people quickly disassociate themselves from postmodern, opinionated reality deniers. But dissociating oneself from the idealistic camp much enough to no longer be toxic is hard work. I've come to many profound realizations throughout my trading journey, where I've successfully managed to merge idealism with realism. I'm probably as close as I'll ever get, yet I'm constantly on the look for things to move me even closer to that golden merge. One method of combining the two is the pleasure I now take in finding an edge in counter strategies, in shorting false outbreaks and front-running the herd. This used to be my number one headache, things that evoked all sorts of negative emotions within, but when I realized it could be turned into an advantage, it made trading playful and rational at the same time, a kind of portal into my own secret world in which I still abide to its laws of nature.
Greetings! Morty, you gotta flip him off. I told him it means peace among worlds.
For according to neurolinguistic programming author Charles Faulkner, the key in choosing is to either choose something which is in accord with our nature or to change our nature in accordance to our dreams. Few people realize they actually have a choice. The beautiful part is that we can hold dreams constant and rather vary our behavior until we're good at whatever we choose, trading for example. This is a practical way of merging idealism, as in dreams, with realism, as in taking whatever empirically proven actions it takes to be successful within that field. But to fully make use of this path, we must first understand why we trade, what our true incentives are. For most of us believe we trade for nothing else but money, but the true reasons often go much deeper than that. As we're running out of time, we'll discuss this very important topic in full in the next episode.